Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another event, Turn the Page from the Dayton Literary Peace Prize. Tonight's episode of Turn the Page is called Heroism and Doubt, the Irony of War. And we have two authors and a moderator who are going to take it from here in a moment. I just want to make everybody aware that the Dayton Literary Peace Prize virtual book club, the next one will be on March 1st, and that will feature author Joanne Tompkins, called What Comes After. She's the Dayton Literary Peace Prize 2022 runner-up for fiction. So everybody tune in for that on March 1st. You can email Emily at DaytonLiteraryPeacePrize.com for more information about that. As for tonight, Heroism and Doubt, the Irony of War, we have Ben Fountain and Andrew Krivak, who are going to be talking with Logan Young. And I'm going to start by reading Ben Fountain's bio. Ben Fountain was born in Chapel Hill and grew up in the Tobacco County of Eastern North Carolina. A former practicing attorney, he is the author of Brief Encounters with Che Guevara, which won the PEN Hemingway Award and the Barnes & Noble Discover Award for fiction, and the novel Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk, winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award and a finalist for the National Book Award. Billy Lynn was adapted into a feature film directed by three-time Oscar winner Ang Lee, and his work has been translated into over 20 languages. His series of essays published in The Guardian on the 2016 U.S. presidential election was subsequently nominated by the editors of The Guardian for the Pulitzer Prize in Commentary. He lives in Dallas, Texas, with his wife of 32 years, Sharon Fountain. Welcome, Ben. Welcome back to the Dayton Literary Peace Prize.
Thank you very much.
Andrew Krivak is the author of 4 novels: The Bear, a Mountain Book Competition winner, Massachusetts Book Award winner, Library Read Selection, and NEA Big Read Selection, as well as the freestanding novels of the Darden Trilogy, which include The Sojourn, a National Book Award finalist and winner of both the Chautauqua Prize and the Dayton Literary Peace Prize, The Signal Flame, a Chautauqua Prize finalist, and Like the Appearances of Horses, forthcoming from Bellevue Literary Press in May 2023. He is also the author of the poetry collection Ghosts of the Monadnock Wolves and the memoir of a Long Retreat in Search of a Religious Life.
Thank you, Gilbert.
A Long Retreat in Search of a Religious Life, as well as the editor of the Letters of William Carlos Williams to Edgar Irving Williams, 1902 to 1912, which received the Lewis L. Martz Prize. He lives with his wife and 3 children in Somerville, Massachusetts, and Joffrey, New Hampshire. Welcome, Andrew. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Gilbert. Great to see you always.
And tonight we have a very special guest who's going to be handling the moderation and the questioning of the authors, and that's Logan Young. Logan served 4 years of active duty in the Army as a transportation specialist, earning a combat action badge for her 1-year tour in Kabul, Afghanistan. She is currently a program manager for the Air Force Institute of Technology at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Dayton, Ohio. Logan's questions will explore the literary, historical, and cultural context of each book that lead to the understanding of both the main and secondary characters and how peace becomes an essential part of that understanding. Welcome, Logan. Stay tuned. You're welcome. At the very bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A icon. You can click on there if you think of anything as you're watching this that you'd like to ask the authors. There might be a time at the very end that we take some questions from our guests. But at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Logan Young.
Thank you all for tuning in. We'll start with an easy question for our authors. So where did the inspiration to write your books come from?
Andrew, your book came first, so you answer first.
All right, I'll go ahead. By the way, Logan and Ben, it's great to see you guys again. I missed October. I miss October. It was a fun time, and looking forward to this tonight as well. So my book had kind of been percolating for my entire childhood, because it was based essentially on stories that my grandmother told me about my grandfather's time an Austrian conscript in the Slovak army when he was a young man. I studied philosophy and classics as an undergraduate, and I had this idea that I would be a poet, and I wrote some poetry. But after I had done my memoir, Long Retreat, after I had spent all those years as a Jesuit, I really started thinking more about prose and storytelling. And I pitched to my agent this idea that maybe I could write a non-fictive account of what a young man's life was like, growing up in the old country in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, being conscripted into an army, and then fighting on the Piave River in World War I, where he was wounded and sent to Sardinia as a prisoner of war, and survived and walked back to this new country of Czechoslovakia, and then managed to make it to America. And there was a long pause on the phone. She said, "It sounds to me like you want to write a novel." And I said, "Well, can I? Do I have permission to move from nonfiction to fiction?" She said, "Absolutely. I'd like to read that novel." And as I wrote it, I imagined this big sprawling thing because, of course, that's the way these things go. But I realized, as I understood more about how to write a novel in the writing of it, that it just started getting pared down more and more and more. And I imagine that, so let me just say specifically to it that the fact of all the stories I heard about all the people in the book became elements in this one character. So Joseph Vinich is really an amalgam of a lot of different characters and a lot of different stories that I had heard growing up, which are by and large true, but there's, it's in no way autofiction. And it was fun to say, okay, so that's where the story is going to take me. That's what I'm going to do. And once I could conceive of that idea of the story as a thing told in 1972 at night, in the space of about, 5 or 6 hours, to initially I was imagining two grandsons who were Beau and Sam Connor, who would be the characters of the next two Darden novels. I realized it didn't need to be anyone. It just needed to be Joseph Vinich speaking that performative, here's my coming of age. And that became essentially the Sojourn, the idea that he was born in the old country, fought for that old country. Oh, he was born, I'm sorry, my own story, born in America, which was my grandmother's story, taken back to the old country, fought in the war there, and then returns to America. That sojourn, that time in which he came of age in the old country, just happened to have a war story and love story in the middle of it. That's what I understood then as this is going to be the kernel of the novel. So,
I just want to say it's great to have the band back together, Logan and Andrew. I had a great time in Dayton in October, and several times over the course of those days, I told Sharon Rabb, I was like, I get it. I get it. I knew Dayton Literary Peace Prize was a great organization and a great endeavor, but experiencing it firsthand and experiencing the community of the DLPP, I got it. And so now, I've joined the cult and wholeheartedly and happily, a cult member. I'm one of Sharon's acolytes. Anyway, I'm really happy to be, talking to y'all again. Billy Lynn is, it's about the Iraq wars, Iraq and Afghanistan wars, the long wars. And really that the book came out of a sense of bewilderment, confusion, questioning, anger. How did we get ourselves into these wars? And why did they go on for so long? And why wasn't there more popular resistance to these wars? And all that coalesced for me on a Thanksgiving Day, when the Dallas Cowboys were playing, as they always do on Thanksgiving Day. And this was at Texas Stadium, and there was a halftime show that featured the American military. And I was just watching it and thinking, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. It's a mashup of basically popular entertainment, militarism, team sports, corporate America, and softcore porn. And I thought, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen, number one. And number two, maybe this is a focus for my confusion. Maybe if I dig into this, I'll start to get some answers, or at least some better questions by way of trying to tell a story. And so that's where Billy Lynn came from.
Thank you both for your very descriptive synopsis on that. And it's good to be back with you all as well. I'm also a Sharon Rabb accolade. So our next question, so you talked about why you wrote the books. Let's talk about the character development. How did you develop the characters that you developed, and what were some maybe stereotypes that you either embraced or avoided when you wrote about those characters?
You want me to go first this time?
Sure.
All right. Okay. I don't know about other writers, but I'm a desperate writer. I am barely hanging on by my fingertips and trying to figure it out as I go along. And I mean, the prospect of sitting down to try to write a novel is extremely intimidating. And the way you calm yourself down, at least the way this writer calms himself down, is to take it a day at a time and to understand that you have to work your way into the story. And it's only by writing the story that you figure out what the story is. But how do you know what the story is until you write it? How do you write it if you don't know what the story is? And so it's you work your way into it. And I had the idea for Billy, and then I knew he would have his squad mates around him, and there would be his Sergeant Dime, and there would be a couple of missing comrades who were killed in action. And beyond that, it was like line by line, paragraph by paragraph, page by page, you start to figure out who these people are. And, stereotypes. In a way, I was leaning in to certain stereotypes and hoping to peel back the layers. I mean, in this book, everybody's in costume. Everybody, the soldiers are in uniform, the football players are in uniform, the cheerleaders are in uniform, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys, he's in his corporate big guy uniform, the fans are in their uniforms. Everybody is wearing their costume and playing a particular role. And for me, the most interesting parts of the book, the most revealing parts, are when people step out of their assigned roles and something real breaks through. So in a way, leaning into stereotypes and cliches and then trying to bust through at certain points.
Yeah, Ben, I love what you said about being a desperate writer. I feel the same way, but I think what's cool, and I know you know this too, is that now, a couple of novels into this gig, I get in the middle of a book and I'm lost, but I say to myself, I've been in these woods before. I know how to get out. And I like that in terms of being, I like that as part of the craft. You cannot not learn the craft as you do it, and that's been I don't know, is it fair to say solace as a writer in these last couple of years? So yeah, I knew, Logan, that my character was going to be a single character. I said before, he was a kind of an amalgam of a lot of different characters. But I think just from my own desperation, like I wanted it to be, it had begun in the third person, but I really thought, you know what, I have to speak this. And so the first thing was knowing that it would be this character. I gave him the name of Joseph. Vintage means the vine. in Slovak, and I gave him a first person point of view. And the thing about the first person, it seems so, it seems like the most freeing point of view, but it's the most restrictive, because you can only give the point of view of that person speaking. So once I got that, I knew I did research on the old country. I was living in London at the time when I wrote this, so there was a good opportunity to travel a lot, and I took that opportunity, going to Slovenia and to the Alps and to Italy. But once I stumbled upon the idea that he would be a sniper. My grandfather was not a sniper; he was a gunner. But the idea that the snipers were alone, it came to me reading. I wasn't Edmund Blunden. It was one of the other English writers one of his great World War I memoirs, and I'm embarrassed to say I've just forgotten who it is. But there's a point where he's about to go on a midnight raid, and it's just at the evening twilight, and he looks over to his lieutenant, and he gives the sign to go, and the man looks out, and he looks back at Siegfried Sassoon, of course. He looks back at Sassoon, and Sassoon says, and there was the star-shaped birthmark on his forehead, indicative of the German sniper who shot him straight through the head because he had put his head up to look out over the parapet. And I was like, of course, that's it. The sniper gives him the capacity to move without local command, without platoon or company command. The sniper is only responsible to regimental command. The other thing I had to do now, I can say that because I had to start doing all this research, not just on snipers, but on snipers in the Austro-Hungarian army, which luckily I was living in London, so I could get that kind of stuff. I made friends with this guy, the firearms curator at the British War Museum in London. That was fun. There's a publisher over there that publishes these sort of one-off monographs full of full-color illustrations and stuff about different war things, and they have a whole thing on the Austro-Hungarian army and how divided it was and how polymathic it was. So those things helped a lot. And then all of those things came together. The addition of Zli Pes, the bad dog, his cousin, so-called cousin, was a late addition. And I realized I needed him too, because I needed not exactly a doppelganger, but a foil, a mirror to Joseph's own sojourn and coming of age as a soldier. So stereotypes I think that's a great question, because I was worried about falling into the stereotype of a writer who writes about battle who's never been in war. You have, Logan, I haven't. And so what I did was this. I thought about the old John Gardner adage of write what you know, but at the same time, Ben, you know too, you can't entirely write what you know, because it's fiction, and why should you all the time? So I see that as a both and. When I was a Jesuit scholastic, I spent 8 years in formation in a religious order, one of the most intellectual in the Catholic Church. And so I started thinking about that. Okay, the places of battle for these men is a function of territory, firearms, and outcome. But the man himself is still a man in formation. And so I had to think about it in that way. I can avoid the stereotype by saying, I know what it is to be in formation. And so that's what I'm going to lean on in the literary notion, in the literary development of my character. And so I feared that the most. And so I realized that this is the one thing I had to give him, was the sense of formation. And ultimately that was how it became a novel of a coming of age. And then I think the best part was once I got him out of battle, it was just the journey back to Czechoslovakia. So that was a matter of, leaning on my own travels in Eastern Europe. And that was a time when I would call up my mom the most and just talk to her. And she'd say, oh, remember Grandma used to say this, and you've lived over there, but she would always tell us this during the, under the Habsburgs and things like that. So those were the kind of things that I began to weave into it. And there you go. Had my guy. So.
Really good descriptions of both of those. I love hearing you guys, even though we've done this a few times, every time you answer the questions, you answer them differently and add a different piece of information that I didn't get before. So it's always interesting to hear you answer these questions. So reading these books about war, I'm not surprised that both storylines had male protagonists. However, both of you chose to include some really influential female characters. So if you could talk a little bit about those female characters and how important those were to incorporate into your stories.
Yeah, it is. I mean, just by definition, it's limiting. Writing about soldiers, it's only very recently that obviously women, in the American Army have gotten combat roles. I mean, there's various ways you can finesse that. You can broaden the book. But I wanted my book to be one day in the life of this squad at Texas Stadium with one extended flashback. And that's when Billy goes home for 2 nights. And so that gave a chance for his mother and his 2 sisters, and one sister in particular, to step to the forefront. And, I kept trying to give the women more pages. I felt like they had a lot more to say and do. And it was frustrating, but I felt like, ultimately I couldn't do that without writing a different book. And I wanted this book to be like an arrow, to go in a pretty straight line. And Billy's sister, Catherine, I hope she plays, I hope she punches above her weight, in the sense that she's a greater presence in the book than the number of pages she gets might indicate. And in a way, she's a moral touchstone of the book. And she's the one who really gets it. His role in the greater scheme of things, and the ways he's being used and manipulated. And she's the one who resists that and fights back against it. So it's very much a book about men and war, but I did the best I could to do justice by the women, and it is what it is.
Yeah.
There is a cheerleader, but I'll leave it at that.
So the Romany woman in my novel, of course, Joseph's mother exists in a as a sort of dreamscape for him, but more directly, the Romany woman he encounters and spends time with when the war is over and he's walking back to the border of Czechoslovakia. That I think a couple things here. I think, Logan, I was really conscious of wanting to get out of that completely male specter of war, and look, we all know from the war in Ukraine now to an entire century, 20th century of people at war, and also in Afghanistan and Iraq, that it's the non-combatants, and by and large the women and children who suffer the most in wars like this. And so the Romani, I had experience with the Roma when I lived in Moscow and when I traveled through Slovakia and the Czech Republic. And I was just I think I talked about this briefly at Tip City High School. I kind of got choked up at the time. I was just so taken with them, and it wasn't sort of gawking at a distance, but it was really appreciating the way in which they are such a solid familial people. I remember this family of Romani on a train in Poprad, just very simple, traveling simply, and everyone from the children right up to what must have been the great grandparents, all just very simple, very elegant, and taking care of each one of them, each other. And this one of the Slovaks I was traveling with, I said, "What?" I said, "Vaso, where do you is that just I thought it was a Slovak family. And he said, they're just gypsies. And I was like, wow, that is rough, because they were just beautiful to me. And I thought that's a family those are people that are really suffering culturally in this country. And I've since done a lot of research on that and realized that that's true. Anyway, fast forward to Taina, The Secret. I just wanted to have that alter. I don't know. She's a kind of alter Christus, if you will, in a way. I realize now, these months later, since our conversation, and it is how Joseph is redeemed insofar as he knows that life is still possible, that can still come, life can still come after the war. And so sojourning with her in the cabin, the hunter's cabin, completely abandoned after she's, attacked by the Honved soldiers, nearly raped, and Joseph saves her life. But she saves his life too in many ways. But the idea that they would just form a bond of life, platonic even, in those months after the war, just seemed really important to me. And then in the midst of my writing that, my wife and I had our first child, and I had to go back and rewrite the whole thing because I was there for the birth. And so I wanted to make sure I got that right. And then she continues to show up in the other two novels, in The Signal Flame, and her child is essentially one of the main characters of my recent novel, Like the Appearance of Horses. So in many ways, she persists.
For all the strife and trauma and bloodshed and violence in the Sojourn, for me, the most terrifying passage is when Joseph has this baby, this newborn.
Yeah.
He's responsible for it. And I mean, he's a man, he can't nurse.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that was excruciating to read, knowing that he knows he's racing against the clock. I mean, to keep this baby alive until he can get it to someone who can, give it sustenance. And that was when I broke out in a cold sweat.
Wow, thanks, Ben.
Yeah, that was very moving, really moving.
Well, the family he takes it to is really, the larger image of the family I saw from a distance on that train. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was really tore up about that part because all I could think about was how, Joseph has already lost everyone. He lost his mother, at a very young age. He lost his father. He lost Lee. And, you think this woman is going to be the person that, fixes all of that for him. And then she dies. And then there's this baby. So
is he going to lose the baby too? I mean, the stakes are really high in that passage.
Definitely. Well, while we're talking about paths that were taken through the story and choosing characters and those sorts of things, I had read Billy Lynn and I kept hearing the word satire. But to me, in my head, that's not what I was thinking. I was thinking this is just how soldiers think and talk. It's not satire, it's authentic. So it was interesting for me to hear it be called that. And in the Sojourn, it's very serious, very emotional, a completely different tone. So tell me a little bit about the genres that you chose. Did you intend on writing satire or a very emotional book? And did you develop any specific techniques for coping with that emotionally through the process?
I don't think Billy Lynn is satire. I think it's straight up realism. And I mean, satire relies on exaggeration, hyperbole, taking the stuff of real life and stretching it a bit farther. And everything in that book either has happened in American life or could very well happen. It's within the realm of possibility. And I mean, Martin Dempsey, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he read the damn book and he commented on it on his website. He said, exaggerated for effect, but worth reading. So we use that as a blurb, in the paperback. But I thought, no, I'm really not exaggerating. I mean, American life is so distended and distorted. It's like a fun house, like a hall of mirrors, and in the years since Billy Lynn came out, I think it's only gotten crazier and more surreal. So I think Billy Lynn is straight up realism, and that's the way I wrote it. And if there are parts in there that seem exaggerated or for effect, that's really just me trying to be true to the nature of the here and now in our collective life.
Yeah, and having been a part of not necessarily the Iraq war, but Afghanistan, that really spoke to me in your book. And that's what I really liked about it, is it was so authentic. I mean, I felt like I was Billy Lynn, listening to him narrate his thoughts and what he was thinking. I have thought those exact thoughts before and didn't realize you just hit the nail on the head. I mean, you really did. I saved a quote in the book. I think it was chapter 8, when Billy said, it's kind of weird being honored for the worst day of your life. And that in itself is the irony of war. We honor these heroes for experiencing something pretty horrific. The first question most people tend to ask me is, did you deploy? How many people did you kill? And how much effed up stuff did you see? Those are the main questions I get, not what my job was. Why did I join the military? None of those things. And I too, I have a combat action badge, which is a step below what Billy Lynn received in the book. It's a accommodation below that, but it says that you were in combat and was, face to face with the enemy. And that's all people want to hear about. That's all they care about. And again, they're praising you for a pretty horrific day. I mean, people died that day. I mean, there were 5 people that lost their lives, and it's pretty intense. So I agree. I don't think it's satire.
Yeah, Ben, I've told you, Ben, this old classicist just read the Iliad straight through Billy Lynn. I just couldn't help it. It's there. And I love that it's the arc of the day. It's the, it's the pace, it's the compression, as well as the extension of the war, the compression on the page, but the understood extension of the time frame. To me, very classic.
Well, let's talk about the Odyssey and the Sojourn.
Well, so to answer your question, Logan, I could not be serious. I was all about literary fiction. I've loosened up a bit, maybe not that much, but I tried to put some humor in The Bear, actually. But I wanted to be a serious novel the closer I got into it, because I knew it was, serious stuff. And I think moments of lightness are like when Zli and Joseph are in the mountains in Italy, and they're talking about what they're going to do after the war. And Zli says, I just want to stay here and farm sheep with your dad. Joseph wants to go to Massachusetts and live by a pond in Massachusetts, because he's from America. And Zli's just like, I just want to go back to the mountains and not shoot anybody. I just want to farm sheep. There's a brief interlude where Tina is very she's not exactly flirtatious, but she sort of puts Joseph in his place about the horse. And just those little moments, I think, in fact, Zli's name, I mentioned this to you all before, but Zli's name was a bet I had with my mom in Prague. There's Zli Pes is a, there's signs on these gates you'll see that says Pozor, Zli Pes. It means beware of the dog. And she laughed about that. And I said, that sounds like a great name for a character. And we had a bet that I could put it in a novel, whatever novel I was going to write, that I would have a character named Zli Pes. And so lo and behold, there you go. So, yeah, but I think I just felt like I had to go serious, you know.
Well, you know, every book has its register. You know, every novel has its sound. And I mean, to me, often when I have the notion for something, whether it's a novel or a short story, it almost always comes right away with, it needs to sound like this. Like there's a sound in my head that corresponds to the notion. And it seemed to me Billy Lynn needed to be, you know, kind of careening and out of control. And there seemed to be it needed to have a lot of information and twists and turns packed into the sentences. Whereas the Sojourn, it felt to me entirely appropriate that it had this kind of meditative, absorptive tone to it, just an entirely different register. And so, you know, to me, it read beautifully and perfectly.
I think that tone is, it was probably just listening to my grandmother talk, and it's why I adapted eventually after several drafts, the performative idea that it would just be spoken in the space of sitting down, having a meal, a drink, and before you know it, it's midnight and the story's over. So, yeah. Also short. That was the other thing I had to realize. If it's going to be serious, it's got to be shorter. Otherwise, you can't go for too long.
So again, they're kind of polar opposites, but both have a lot of similarities. Actually, when I first was tasked with this and they said, we want you to talk about these two books and their similarities, I said, what similarities? And then I reread them both with those eyes. And I was like, okay, I can see the similarities. So, but the differences kind of are what, you know, kind of bring it together. So both of you talk about battle scenes in both of your books. And again, Andrew, with your very serious tone, you went into very descriptive and colorful detail on the things that Joseph Inslee experienced. And Ben, you chose the opposite. You left very little detail. You kind of kept us, you know, on the hook there throughout the whole story to see if we were going to actually hear the full nitty gritty of what Billy Lynn went through, and we never do. So why don't both of you talk to me about why you chose to go those routes with the battle scenes?
Yeah. I think for me, it was the research sort of dictated it. The sniper is a separate clinical surgeon, if you will, in many ways, doing the job, getting the job done one bullet at a time. And so, but wow, you know, it's the destruction is immediate in the snipe. Sharpshooting is a I mean, I guess you could say it's a form of terrorism. It reduces morale. You don't know where it's going to come from. If you're face to face with someone, you know, it's you against him or her. But the terror of the sharpshooter coming out of World War I was, you just didn't know. And so I think that description was meant to be imitative of that function. And again, I really honestly, I didn't really want to do it too much because, you know, it would lose its precision, and it would just get a little bit too much. So, and I very consciously broke the novel into thirds. So there's the younger Joseph, there's the war, and then there's the walk home, precisely for that balance. So,
yeah, when I was writing the first draft, and in the first third of Billy Lynn, we get an extended flashback to those couple of days Billy spends at home. And I kept thinking, well, we'll get the battle. It'll be in the last third of the book. We'll get another extended flashback. And oh, how symmetrical and elegant this will be, you know, to have these, you know, two flashbacks. But I got to the end of the first draft and the battle hadn't happened. And I was like, well, it'll come around. You know, it's that's the way first drafts are. And so in subsequent drafts, I kept waiting for it to assert itself. And it never felt right. And, I give you fragments of the battle. Like there are a couple of fragments from Billy's point of view. And, a lot of it is a blur. It's this weird combination of blur and very precise, specific details. And then there's the footage that the Fox News crew shot. And he's seen that footage and he feels like that's not like anything I was in, but that's me. But he doesn't recognize it. And so ultimately I thought, I'm going to follow where the material is taking me. And that is, no, you aren't going to do the whole battle. It would have been fun to do the battle. It would have been a challenge. It would have been satisfying and it wasn't out of laziness that I didn't do it. It felt right not to do it. And again, it's like every novel has its imperatives, or what we hope are its imperatives asserting themselves. And ultimately I thought, no, that's all of the battle that I'm going to give us, those few fragments, and I'll leave it at that.
I remember finishing Billy Lynn, Ben, and thinking, he did it. He didn't do it. I just was like, wow, that's just brilliant, And it's like, oh, because this is it, of course, And there are plenty of battles, psychic ones, internal ones along the way. I really thought that was like spot on. So,
but also Billy's a grunt.
Yeah. Right.
Whereas Joseph, he's a specialist, he's a surgeon, and there is so much premeditation, preparation that goes into what he does. It's almost like an operation, and he's a surgeon getting ready. So it seems to me entirely appropriate that these are going to be set pieces, when he's out on his mission. Whereas with Billy, it was just all, wham, 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 and then it's over.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think you both captured what you were going for very well. When the first time I read Billy Lynn, it never dawned on me that you didn't mention the battle. It never dawned on me. And then when I got the questions the first time and I reread it the second time, I said, I guess he did leave the battle out. I didn't really think about it, because how Billy was thinking is how I had thought of the war in my experience as well. The battle wasn't the highlight. It was everything else. But the only thing anybody else cared about was the battle. So I thought that was ironic. Another thing that you both talk about that you don't, at least I don't commonly read in a lot of war novels, or that's really even discussed in war, is desertion. So I'm just curious, is why did you both think that was important to include in your book, and what prompted you to add that in there?
Thoughts of desertion, right? Yeah.
Well, Sigrid Sassoon said soldiers are dreamers. And I think, when you're going through, such a miserable experience, of course you're going to dream, fantasize about walking away. I don't know. I will be honest. After the halftime show, the last third of the book seemed to lose its mojo. And my editor and I were talking. She was like, it kind of runs out of steam. And so, the desperate writer, I was like, how do I keep, the tension amped up, the stakes amped up, and so, I was brainstorming, and I thought, put this temptation in front of him, and the temptation, it didn't seem to me it would be credible unless it was coming from a powerful outside source and speaking to something that's already in him, but I expect is in every soldier, and that's his sister, Catherine. She says, you've done your job And this is a bullshit war anyway. You know, you are not going to go back and die in Dick Cheney's bullshit war. You've done your part. And she really works on him and the limited exposure she has to him. And so I felt like it, you know, I didn't want it to be just a gimmick, you know, to keep the narrative, you know, energy going. It needed to be something. It needed to mean something, and it needed to reveal more about Billy in the story. And so, you know, in desperation, you know, flailing around, that's the thing that stood out, that seemed like, okay, that can do the work.
Yeah, I think that outside influence, Ben, is really is what it's all about. Now, it's almost like it's got to be there. If you think about, you know, what all the World War I memoirs I just absorbed, there, any hint of desertion always had that sort of push from the outside. And for Joseph, it's the death of his lead pest, and the idea that, hang on a second, Joseph was the one who was gung ho to go, lied about his age, got the, you know, got the papers, and then shows up on the marksman, on the shooting range as a marksman already. So he's gone. But when it's all gone, then, and he knows he's still got another year of the war to go, you know, that's where it's, wow, what am I doing? I could walk through the same woods I took to get here, to get out of here. No one would miss me. I'm, you know, just another pawn of the emperor's, and maybe I really do need to go back and you know, herd those sheep like Lee said he wanted to, and that maybe that would be a much better life. So, but then, you know, I think it's also, well, in formation there's duty, and you just get on with it. So.
Yeah, I think fantasizing about desertion kind of gives the soldiers in each book a sense of peace, as you will.
I like
And
that.
yeah, that's the thought that I had with it. And so with that thought, both of your books received acclaim from the Dayton Literary Peace Prize. So did you see these books being about peace as you wrote them, or when you finished writing them?
Yeah, I was thinking along the lines of surrender initially. And it's David Jones, in parenthesis, his idea of the rifle, leave the rifle, you know, leave it under the oak, use that as an epigraph. So for me, it was a sense of surrender. And even my grandfather, you know, I know that he was, he had a broken finger or a gunshot in his finger. And I know from the photographs in the War Museum and the stories what the Battle of the Piave was all about, and it was not pretty. I just imagine my grandfather being, you know, he sees the Italians and the British coming over the top, and he's just like, I'm done, forget it. And he gets whacked in the finger or shot or whatever it was. And I'll take the prisoner of war camp any day. At least I get to go home. Turns out 40% of the Austrian soldiers died in that Sardinian prisoner of war camp. My grandfather didn't. But I don't know. I think that idea of surrender and peace begin to live side by side. And so that's what I was thinking of. But I also, you know, once I then began to write on the back end of the novel, it seemed like where surrender and peace become we'll just say siblings, I don't know. Then the idea of Joseph bringing the child into the world, the love that he realizes is possible, and just going home, that becomes his place of peace as well. That surrendering of the child over to the Romani family is his great act of his small act of surrender, which ultimately becomes a larger act of peace for him. That's what I was thinking of, that sense of surrender as a small act of just giving over, not so much giving up, giving over. Yeah.
Well, Billy doesn't get to experience peace because, I mean, throughout the book, there's awareness that as soon as the football game is over, the Bravos are going to be packed into their limo, driven back to Fort Hood, and they're going straight back to Iraq. And so there's no letdown. There's no sense of having come through. I mean, they are still very much in the middle of it. This is just a bizarre and kind of a fluke of a respite from the war. So there's no peace in the book, but I hoped that what I wanted for the reader to experience was, here is this absolutely unremarkable young American man. I mean, 19 years old, below average in every demographic. I mean, he graduated, from a crappy public high school in rural Texas. He probably had lackluster SATs. He never applied to college. He's got a bit of a criminal record, and he's a private in the Army. He's cannon fodder. I mean, he's like, here's another one. But I was hoping to show enough of who he is and how absolutely wonderful and miraculous he is in his average self. And I think that's true of most human beings. I mean, we do have miracles in ourselves, and we do have genius in ourselves if it's allowed to flourish. And so I wanted the reader to feel like, okay, at the end of the book, Billy's going back to the war, and I want the reader to feel like, God, we cannot lose him.
Right.
Because if we lose him, we have lost something really special. Yeah. And multiply that by however many soldiers were deployed in the war. And every single one we lost is a huge tragedy. That's the price of war. And so, in contrast to that, how precious peace is. Maybe that's where the peace comes in.
I was going to say, so with that said, and with winning the Peace Prize, winning the Peace Prize, the emphasis on the peace part, did that bring any new revelations or ideas associated with your book that you hadn't considered before you had won the prize?
Andrew, go ahead.
So when I was told I was a finalist, I thought, oh yeah, that's cool. I like what's going on there. The pen is mightier than the sword, and it made me it just made me think, like, yeah, more people than just myself have recognized that I wanted to do something that in which, again, I have to say this small act in a big war is it has consequences in a good way. So Ben, I think exactly what you said about Billy Lynn it just resonates so much. You're rooting for the guy. It's like, how could we lose this person, this character? Yeah, I think ultimately it was like, I think I could not have that idea about Joseph Vinich, that I wanted him to survive and come out of it thinking, I'm gonna make a better life if possible. That's why he and his father too has that sense of that. The fact that he buries the gold away, and it's a little bit of like, look, if you make it, if you don't, it's back into the earth where it belongs. If you do, then give it a go. Here's another small act. Just keep at it until it's over.
I love it when the hero gets the loot.
That's a story. There's your stereotype, Logan.
No. So often they don't.
That's true, yeah.
Oh, so close. Let him get the money for once. Let him make a clean getaway. And Joseph does.
Well, it turned out to be only about $100 all told. I Googled the price of gold in 1919.
Yeah, well, at least he got away with something.
Yeah.
And it's like, be the one who gets away. So that was very cool and satisfying and earned. I mean, I hadn't really thought about it in those terms until, Logan, you brought it up in October. I mean, if it's a book about war, by implication, on some level, it's pointing toward peace or implicating peace. They're just bound together.
Yeah.
And I think it's wonderful that there is a Dayton Literary Peace Prize, because war gets all the heat, all the attention in this society, and far too emphasis on peace.
Yeah.
I agree. When I thought about the topic of tonight's conversation, the irony of war, that's all I kept thinking about, is how the whole thing is ironic. The stories were ironic, the situations were ironic, because like you said, you can't have one without the other. We go to war and murder people in the name of peace. We were in Afghanistan winning hearts and minds as we're aiming our 50 cal at kids, so that is the irony. Yeah. Well, we have about 3 minutes. I don't know how we want to wrap this up. I don't see any questions in the chat. Gilbert?
No, I think if there's anyone else you just want to have one more question or two more questions, and we can wrap it up.
I've got a question for Logan. Okay. What kind of thoughts during your 4 years of active duty, and you don't have to answer this, but what kind of thoughts or dreams or fantasies went through your head about deserting, about, I'm done, I'm just walking away, this is bullshit? And they could even just be, passing thoughts. I'm just curious.
It's funny that you asked me that, because, I've kind of just subconsciously suppressed a lot of my military experience. I just closed that book and walked away. And so I hadn't, thought about it too much. And then I keep doing these events where, war comes up, and I'm like, oh yeah, there's that. And so your book really hit home for me with how Billy Lynn talked about the whole war, how stupid it was, how meaningless it was. Everyone keeps asking you, do you think we're winning over there? And, I can remember I was deployed when Osama bin Laden was killed. I was cleaning my truck in the motor pool, and we're getting ready to go out on a mission. Someone comes running down to the motor pool and says, they killed Osama bin Laden. And I'm like, okay, you think we're going home? And I can just remember thinking how stupid everything was, and how you just don't feel the importance, and you don't realize desertion is just a really common thing to fantasize about. Everyone, it's kind of it reminds me of being in prison. You say, when I get out, I'm going to do this, I'm going to change my life, that. So the whole time you're in the military, you're fantasizing about leaving. I can't wait till my time's up, I can't wait till my contract's up, F this place when I get out of here. So it's actually extremely common. I thought about it on a daily, regular basis. And when I had first deployed, we didn't quite have our mission yet. So there's 3 months of us just doing busy work, pulling guard 24 hours and just meaningless stuff. And I can remember thinking, I'm going to go crazy. I can't do this for 365 days. And then with the constant looming threat of maybe you'll die, maybe you won't. And then you get home and you didn't die, and you're just kind of like, okay. So you think about it. And I would say that more soldiers, it is a common theme that you fantasize about the idea of deserting, but deep down, your pride won't let you, your obligation won't let you. So, you just have to tough it out and just complain every step of the way.
Well, Logan, I thought you did a phenomenal job. That was just a fascinating discussion. It was really just so great to listen and just relax and listen to you guys talk about publishing and books and themes and plotting. It was just so fascinating. I want to thank everybody for coming out to this particular Turn the Page, Heroism and Doubt, the Irony of War. As I mentioned earlier on March 1st, there's the Dayton Literary Peace Prize virtual book club featuring Joanne Tompkins, and that's on March 1st. And it's called What Comes After. That will be what Joanne will be talking about. Also want to remind everybody that the this year's Dayton Literary Peace Prize event will be held on November 11th and 12th of 2023. So keep that on your calendar and stay tuned to the Dayton Literary Peace Prize for more information as we go forward. I just want to thank Andrew and Ben and Logan for doing this tonight. It was really, again, a fascinating discussion. I really enjoyed it. And we hope to see you next at the next Turn the Page event. Thank you very much, guys.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Logan. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, guys.
Logan. Thanks, Ben.
Oh,
Good night,
pleasure.
everyone.
All right. Till next time.
Until next time. Talk to you later.
Till next time. Bye, guys.